The demonstrator for this video is not wearing a respirator and safety glasses to facilitate the production of this video. Whenever working with chemicals or performing any activity that disturbs paint on a structure built prior to 1978, it is important to always wear proper safety equipment, to lay out adequate protection to collect any debris that may be generated, and to prevent children, pets, and others from entering the work area.
Welcome to Historic Denver's program on window weatherization and restoration. This is part of a series of workshops that Historic Denver is producing in conjunction with the National Trust for Historic Preservation and History Colorado. What we're going to look at today is how historic windows are typically constructed, some of the weather efficiency upgrades that can be made to make them more efficient, and also just some general tips and tricks for making your windows operate more effectively. Now, historic windows are often looked at as one of the first things that people go for trying to make their homes more energy efficient, with a couple of interesting little upgrades. Those include adding on weather stripping along the sides and meeting rail and upper and lower rail of the windows, and adding on a secondary glazing layer like a storm window. Before starting any major window work, you want to make sure that you're always using safe lead practices. I'm going to show you a few things that will be important for you as homeowners to use, but you should also be aware that there is a program called the EPA Lead Safe that all contractors who work on buildings that are built prior to 1978 have to be members of. So when working inside, you want to always make sure that you've got your floor covered and all of your belongings moved away from at least a 6-foot perimeter from whatever area you're working on. I like to use a 4 mil to 6 mil plastic. You're going to want to make sure that you've got a lead-approved respirator, and you want to make sure that you control any dust that you create in your environment. I utilize an actual HEPA vacuum for any of my cleanup work. Again, just make sure that if you hire someone to do this work, that they are EPA Lead Safe certified to make sure that they're abiding by all the rules that are designed to keep you safe. First thing we're going to look at is how this window is put together. We have a mock-up here. Typically, this window would have a 2x4 along the side here. This would be the interior side of the window. So this is the side that faces inside your house, and this will be the exterior. So as I said, 2x4 here, which creates this pocket which the weights ride up and down in. There'll be a double header along here, and another 2x4 over here to create this pocket for the other side as well. First thing you'll notice is that I've got this window partially half painted so as to make it more distinct which window pieces are which. These unpainted portions here are considered the inner trim. These are what make the track that the lower sash, which is this, ride up and down in. As you can see, there's a track between this piece of wood and this piece of wood, which is exactly the width of this window here, so this can ride up and down. So I'm going to start taking this window apart, and I'll explain the pieces as I take them off. Here are some of the tools I like to have on hand whenever I'm taking apart an older window. A utility knife, nice blade, a paint scraper, fairly narrow, fairly skinny so that you can get into tight places without really destroying the wood, and a little flat bar with a nice wide end here so that I can use that to pry against things just a little bit, very gently. First up, this is called the inner stop. This is a piece of wood, typically profiled, pretty decorative, that runs along the entire inside of this window. It's going to be what forms the channel that this lower sash rides up and down in. As if you can see here, I've painted this window so that we've got some painted portions and some unpainted portions to help differentiate between different pieces of trim. This little piece here is going to typically either be painted in place or finished depending on what style of window you have, and there'll be caulk and paint all along this channel here. That's what you're going to cut with this utility knife. So cut along these edges here, trying to be careful that you're actually cutting right into the groove and not gouging into this wood or this wood. Once you've got your paint lines cut, take something flat, either your pry flat bar or your paint scraper, and I like to wiggle it into the corners here and start loosening it up. And when you feel a nail, you can usually work closer to where the nail is to help you prevent cracking this wood. But you'll pry it off, and once you finally got loose, you can pry these out. So what you'll find now that the interior stop is off is that this lower sash here can just be pulled out. It's now free. There's nothing really holding it into the window. With the lower sash loose, if you still have your weight cords attached, you'll want to take off one side first, and typically these will be nailed in place because the little knots have a tendency of slipping out. Let me go ahead and detach these. Now, you can either let these go to the bottom of the weight pocket, or what I often do so that I don't have to worry about the weights falling, would be to tie a large knot so that it hangs up there on the little pulley and doesn't just fall to the bottom, potentially causing some damage. Now the way these old windows are constructed is that a hole is drilled here for the knot, which is this on the end of the weight cord, sticks into this little hole, and a channel was grooved out for the cord to ride in. This window also has an additional long groove that was cut in sometime later after construction that the previous owner had put a metal jam liner in, and the metal jam liner was supposed to ride up and down this groove. I'll be showing you a different use for one of these grooves just a little bit later on when I come to weather stripping. Another important function or feature of these older windows is the way they're constructed. Kind of hard to tell on the painted side here, but if you look, you can see that this is a mortise and tenon joint, which means that there are notches that stick out of this piece of wood that stick into grooves on this piece of wood. Now, the great thing about a mortise and tenon is that there's a peg that connects the two pieces, and if there's a problem with the top rail or the side that needs to have the entire piece be replaced, you can remove the peg and then take out the whole piece and replace just that unit instead of replacing the whole sash. With the lower sash out, you'll see that there are two strips of wood here that create the channel that the upper sash rides up and down in. These are called the parting beads, because they keep the two sashes apart. And they're oftentimes considered sacrificial because it's hard to get these out when the window's been painted in place without destroying them. But if you can get the upper sash loose, you can push it all the way to the bottom, you'll be a long way ahead of the game, because then you can cut the paint lines that have always accumulated along through here. If you can get to the outside, cut the paint lines that have come along through there. And sometimes these are nailed in place, but oftentimes they're just meant to hold in place by friction alone. So it's just a piece of wood that sits in a groove. And this parting bead just sits into a groove about 1/2 inch deep, about 1/2 inch wide on both sides. Now I just took out the one because if all you want to do is replace a piece of glass, or if you're trying to replace a broken weight cord, you don't need to take out the other side because you can just twist the upper sash off to the side. Then, like I say, these are typically nailed in place, so you're going to have to deal with the nails a little bit. You can either let these fall to the bottom of the weight pocket, or you can tie a knot. Now that the upper and lower sash are out, we can address one of the more common maintenance issues, which is the replacement of these cords. These are just cotton braided cords and they do break over time. Typical way to do this is to look for the weight pocket, which would often be found down here, but they can be found almost anywhere on the window. As you can see from the outside edge here, you can see where someone else had cut out here. And when they originally constructed the window, they drove in these two finish nails to create a little, basically, groove for this pocket door to hold on to. It's screwed in at the bottom and shoved up against the nails at the top to create a tight fit. Over on the inside, it's usually pretty seamless. You can see there's a small seam right along here, and there's also a seam down here and a little screw. Over the years, these can become kind of ratted up because they've been unscrewed so many times or peeled out so many times to put in new weight cords. So you have to be kind of gentle with them. And you may have to do some repairs to them with epoxy. So let me just unscrew this little guy here. And that just wiggles down. So, now that we've taken off our little weight pocket, typically when your cord is broken, you'll find your weight sitting back here inside the wall somewhere, typically right around the bottom. So, if your pocket door isn't big enough to actually get the weight out, you can usually arrange it enough to where you can get to the top part here and cut off the old fending rope and be able to attach a new piece. So let's say you're going to put a new piece in here, and I'll just bring it out to where you can see it. Depending on the size of the hole, you might not have too much to work with, but you might have enough. You always want to make sure this is going to last for a little while, even though these cotton cords aren't really going to go too far. I like to go twice around, poke that through, back through this little hole, and tighten it down. I believe the traditional knot is considered a bowline, if I remember correctly. This is certainly something that's not going to be going anywhere anytime soon. the knot itself pinches on the loose end over here, creating a nice tight fit. So that would be through here like this. And you're going to want to fish down a line through here. So to actually get your new line in, this is really complicated here. I take an old piece of wire attached to a piece of string, and I sort of feed it over this little pulley here. And the tricky part, of course, is actually getting it to go down the wall without getting hung up on all the different things that are hanging out on the wall. So the weight of the metal actually pulls it down, and after a few seconds you should be able to see it come out through the weight pocket. Next up, tying on the rope. So once you've got this down here, just kind of feed along. There. Now you've fed through your new line so that you can attach this to the weight and attach this to the window. The way I like to determine how long it needs to be, I can just go ahead and pull this back out, reattach the one that's already there. Is I'll have my window in place here, and I'll know approximately where that hole is I need to make a knot, and I'll pull the weight all the way up until it hits the pulley, and if the knot's right around here or so, then I know I can cut my rope right about here, make a knot, and that way when the window is all the way at the top, it won't hit the bottom, and when it's all the way at the bottom, it won't hit the pulley. So here's a quick note about weights. A lot of times you'll see a number stamped on the weight which will actually tell you how much it weighs. And the whole purpose of the weight is to provide an exact counterbalance to the sash. Each weight is equal to 1/2 of the sash's weight, which makes it so that when you've got the sash properly attached, it can be put in any position and it'll hold itself in that position without, you know, pulling itself up because the weights are too heavy, and it won't have the window pulling the weights up because the window is too heavy. If you have a problem finding the sash that belong to your house, you can go to many salvage yards and finding plenty of different size weights to make your own. If you find one that's just a little bit too heavy, you can actually cut them down, or if you've got one that's just a little bit too light, you can add on different little washers or other hunks of metal to the rope end of things to make them more evened out. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video to be informative, and if you have any other questions about old windows, please contact historicdenver.org or the National Trust for Historic Preservation. Old windows are considered to be the eyes of a home, and by following these tips and techniques, you can ensure that they last for generations to come.